Sometimes before my day truly begins, I like to stand in front of the mirror and stare into the eyes of the angry sack of pissy air I've become, and think back to an older time about that young, spunky piece of arse I used to be who really liked TF2 and Pokémon. Wait a minute, I still like those things. And I'm only 22. And why does this bathroom look like an IKEA display unit? Point being, just like me, any shred of creativity the Pokemon games had left they are currently clinging to with a used PP up and a goddamn dream. So why don't we give this topic the LQ treatment, the home of 2025 challenge pissing, by talking about what the TF2 Mercs would be like as Pokemon gym leaders. Pretty simple rules for this video. I'm trying to keep my intros under 40 seconds these days, goddammit. We're going to start off by covering the Merc who I think would be the first gym leader to appear in a game and therefore is going to have the weakest team, and by finishing on the Merc who would have the strongest team and would be the final gym leader you fight before the Champions Row. Now, one thing the non-glazy eye amongst you might have picked up on is that there are typically 8 gym leaders per Pokemon game and we have 9 Mercs to deal with. So to fix this issue, 2 of our Mercs are going to be partaking in a double battle. Place your bets down below for who they're going to be. I will heart the first comment to get it right. And with that all out of the way, we'll start the video in a second because we have some unattended business to account for, as I would like to give a big shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Mango.store. Mango.store is an online TF2 buying and selling website that offers extensively better rates than the likes of the Steam Community Market or the accursed in-game shop. Lads, if you're anything like my lonesome, you love TF2 items but don't like paying through the nose for them. And this is why I've been an avid customer of Mango.store for over a year now. And Mango.store offers so much more than just buying and selling items, as they are currently hosting the largest ever giveaway in TF2 history with the grand prize of 3 professional killstreak golden frying pans. Lads, click the affiliate link in the description below or scan the QR code on your screen now to help support me, this channel, and Mango.store, and a humongous thank you to Mango.store for being the first supporters of this channel. Now, back to our regularly scheduled program. So let's start out with the cheekiest of our trainers and then go from there. Scout would be the first Pokemon gym leader you'd encounter in the region of New Mexico. I didn't really think that one out. And he would most definitely be a flying type gym leader. I know in the Pokemon video I made a long while ago, I called him a water type because, well... But if I were to have another crack at that, I'd definitely say he was a flying type. In terms of what Pokemon he'd train, we're slightly limited in creativity due to the fact that he is our first gym leader, so he has to be entry level. That means he's only going to have 2 Pokemon with 3 moves each on them, somewhere in the levels of 15 to 20. But that doesn't mean we can't perfectly pick a pair of pickled Pacers. Or fast Pokemon, as the American would say. Scout is to speed to what incest is to the Welsh, and therefore we're going to need 2 hasty chaps to join our team. The first Pokemon I'm picking is Ninjask. Yes, the 3rd fastest Pokemon in the game. Now just hear me out on this one. Ninjask's main strengths come from its speed boost ability and the ability to pass its speed onto other teammates by using the move Baton Pass. But if you take those 2 things away, it's fine. I mean, it's nothing really to write home about, and therefore I think that's a pretty good fit for an entry-level gym leader. I'm not really going to focus too much on the moves here, just simple, weaker moves for a simple, weaker man, but something I will focus a bit more on is the ace Pokemon. I didn't have time to explain this in the intro, but every gym leader has something known as an ace Pokemon, which is basically their signature strongest Pokemon. And so for Scout, I'm going with Kilowattrel. Being the Gen 9 regional bird, there's a good chance that many people don't care what Kilowattrel is and don't care what it does, but allow me to tell you, this thing is cracked. Amazing stats, really strong move pool, and some of the coolest abilities in the entire game. So we're going to add this thing to the team and slightly worsen up the moves it gets access to, and bingo, we have a pretty good, pretty well balanced ace Pokemon. Bugs grow, birds fly, wind shines, and brother, Scout gets his ass handed to him because he's the first gym leader. Alright then, on to our next gym leader, and I think Pyro as a fire gym leader is a pretty good fit. The positioning of the Mercs on this list isn't based on anything, however, how they play in game and what their personalities are like are huge contributing factors. Scout, for example, is a complete and utter pushover and is therefore more fitting for a first place gym leader than Amy Schumer is for unemployment. And as for Pyro, wearing a full flame retardant suit means we can give all of his Pokemon the Flash Fire ability. The Flash Fire ability makes your Pokemon completely immune to fire type damage, and if they get hit with a fire type move, their next fire type move gets a 50% increase in power. Not quite how it works in TF2, but you know, we'll take what we can get. And we're going to need 3 Pokemon this time around, as gym leader Pokemon numbers typically look a little something like this. And so I think the first of our 3 weaker Pokemon we're going to choose for Pyro is Lampent. Chandelure is pretty good. Lampent is nothing, and therefore we can just throw some moves onto it, put it into a team, and yeah, it will do pretty well. The second Pokemon is going to be a fully evolved one, which is Centiskorch. I really like this thing, but it seems I am the only person on the planet who does. Centiskorch really doesn't offer too much in the way of anything. It's slow, but not really slow enough to be used on a Trick Room team. It's got decent stats all around, its abilities are subpar, and is generally a very good early to mid-game Pokemon, which is why I think it would serve a pretty good challenge for an early game gym leader. And then finally, for Pyro's ace Pokemon, I've gone with a very special one. I'm choosing Ninetales. I legitimately love to use Ninetales competitively, although I typically run a drought setup, and well, we're not giving that to a second gym leader. Being a Gen 1 Pokemon, Ninetales can just kind of learn any sort of special move, so it's quite versatile. However, we are going to make its moveset relatively linear for this challenge. Substitute all of the stronger fire moves with weaker ones, and we find ourselves a pretty well balanced, yet still challenging second gym leader. To ensure that we don't have all three attack classes taking up the first three positions on this list, Demo is going to be our third gym leader, and he is going to be a ghost specialist. I would utterly love to see the aftermath of Demo being transported into the Pokemon universe. The entire thing would be about as stable as Amber Heard in a mattress factory. Now, why I've made Demo a ghost specialist rather than fire or steel like I did in my previously aforementioned Pokemon video is for many good reasons. The biggest of which being both of those types are being taken up by other characters on this list, but Demo's specialty in spirits is actually very well connected to his character, as his sword, the Eyelander, is haunted by the ghost of a dead king. Combine that with the fact that he was able to tame said spirit with churros, beer, and television, and you have the makings of a pretty excellent ghost trainer. Demo's first Pokemon is going to be a Yamask, and I've done this for a few clever reasons. The first one being that his other two Pokemon are going to be relatively strong, and therefore I want his first one to be a bit weaker to balance it out. And the second reason being that Yamask is holding ahead, and as we all know, Demo has a thing for that. For Demo's second Pokemon, we're going with one of my favourites of Gen 9, Cerulege. You might have noticed earlier in the video I was actually using a Cerulege called Eyelander, which is one of my favourite Pokemon to use competitively in Scarlet and Violet. I managed to catch this shiny one from a raid, and yes, it is actually a shiny one, but no, you can't really tell. And surprisingly enough, it was the largest it possibly could have been. So, safely confirmed, he's a big boy. We're going to give this Cerulege Flash Fire because I don't think giving it weak armor is fair, and we'll throw on some weaker moves as well because this thing's 125 attack can really pack some punches. You might have noticed that we're mostly basing Demo's Pokemon loadout on weapons like the Eyelander, and well, if you haven't noticed that, rewatch the entire segment. And this trend doesn't stop as we move into Demo's ace Pokemon, which I think would most definitely be an Aegislash. Sword and shield you might say. This Pokemon has everything that Demo aspires to be as a ghost trainer. By including both Aegislash and Cerulege, we actually include Demo's other types of fire and steel from the previous video, so I think ultimately everything's wrapped up in a pretty neat bow here. Aegislash is going to have its signature move, however the rest of its moves are going to be pretty weak to compensate because, well, this thing is even worse than Cerulege. And thus we have a significant jump in power from Pyro, but still a pretty balanced gym leader fight. Now those of you who saw the previous edition in this series of me combining shooting games with Pokemon types, which is surprisingly successful, you will be familiar with Mr. Fresh, my competitively viable Galarian Slowbro fat enough to tank earthquakes from a Groudon and then kill said Groudon with his mind. Now, Mr. Fresh this time around has a challenge for you. He would like you in the comments below to give him the best compliment, and the winner gets this, a shiny Galarian Slowbro which I've bred myself. And if you don't play Pokemon, then you can have this. I'll be choosing the winner of the compliment competition in exactly 7 days from this video's upload, so make sure to leave a nice compliment down below and do not email it to me. If I get a single email from any of you with a compliment for Mr. Fresh, we are publicly beheading him. Oh yeah, and subscribe because that will increase your chances or something. Anyway, the next mercenary we're going to cover isn't actually a mercenary at all, because it's two of them. This is the double battle. And honestly, if you thought it was going to be anyone else other than Heavy and Medic, I really don't know what to say. Pairing Heavy and Medic together does leave us with a rather big problem though, as in my original video I stated that Heavy would be a fighting ground type and Medic would be a grass normal type based on a medicinal joke that nobody understood, when in reality I think he'd be a psychic fairy type. Now, as you can probably guess, none of these types are the same, and we have to pick just one for this gym battle. So I've gone back and forth on this quite a lot. I really have been scratching my head, and I've ultimately decided on the Psychic type for the main reason that the Psychic type has the most amount of Pokemon that can evolve into two different forms, which I think would be a really cool gimmick for a double battle. So an example of this being Slowpoke, who can evolve into either Slowbro or Slowking. And speaking of the Slowpoke line, the first Pokemon Heavy and Medic are going to have are a Galarian Slowbro and a Galarian Slowking. The Galarian form specifically for the reason that Galarian Slowking has an ability called Curious Medicine, and if that isn't a perfect perfect fit for our curious medicinal man, then I really don't know what is. Galarian Slowbro as well, just to complete the set, and because Mr. Fresh is really cool. And also apparently they taste really nice, so maybe Heavy would be interested in that. And as for the ace Pokemon they're both going to have, we're going with a Gallade for Heavy and a Gardevoir for Medic. With this being a double battle, each of them gets 2 Pokemon, so they both get 1 normal Pokemon and 1 ace. And matching a Gallade and a Gardevoir together continues with our theme of converging evolutions. Whether or not this battle would actually be difficult, I'm really not too sure of. I remember playing Sapphire and fighting Tate and Liza, the only other double gym leader battle in the games. And because they both had only 2 Pokemon each, I thought it was a bit of a pushover. So I've decided to beef these guys up amply. I've even given both of Medic's Pokemon healing moves, so how's about that? Our next mercenary is Sniper, and you might think that's relatively boring as there's not a lot we can do with him. However, we can have a lot of fun if we make him a grass gym leader. Grass in this context coming from his nickname as the Bushman, and therefore I'm just going to fill out his team with the most bush-related Pokemon I could find. And yeah, turns out there's not very many of them. The first Pokemon on his team is going to be a Brambleghast. Australia is known for having a huge issue with tumbleweeds, something we in the UK laugh at because we know how incompetent they are when it comes to fighting battles. And so a tumbleweeding Pokemon with its unique wind-based ability is... well, it's kind of an ironic joke, isn't it? Brambleghast definitely had a lot of interest as a competitive Pokemon when the Scarlet and Violet games were brand new. However, over time, after seeing how it plays, it just kind of fell off, just like Deadlock. Anyway, the next Pokemon we're choosing is a Tangrowth. Now, I know Tangrowth isn't inherently a bush, but it is really the closest thing I could get without including Shaman. Tangrowth is a weird Pokemon in that it really has seen some use throughout time, but no one really likes it. In a world of Steelixes and starter Pokemons, does anyone really care for this thing? Anyway, it's pretty close to being a bush Pokemon regardless, so it fills the criteria for our list. The third Pokemon I'm choosing for Sniper is Therathorn, and this is definitely where the bush criteria falls apart slightly. Therathorn is not a bush, it is meant to be a spiky seed, but it really is as close as we're gonna come. Turns out, bush isn't a very popular subgenre of Pokemon. Therathorn is typically used on stall teams as it's really good defensively, so we're not gonna do that for a gym battle. We'll still give it some synergistic moves and abilities, but it's not going to be running a typical Therathorn setup. And as for Sniper's ace Pokemon, we're going with Breloom, a kangaroo mushroom. I completely and utterly forgot Breloom existed until making this video, and I'm confident most of you have as well. This thing is a kangaroo mushroom, and that is the absolute best synergistic grass type we could possibly pair with Sniper. There's not really much else I have to say about Breloom. Breloom is typically one of those Pokemon that Gen 3 heads absolutely love, and everyone else just uses for false swipe, but I have a feeling that Sniper would have a much larger appreciation for this Pokemon than I and many other people would. Now, could someone please tell me how we went 12 minutes into a Lon'qudor video without bringing up this lunatic or his immense fighting prowess? Soldier was a really difficult one to choose Pokemon for, as I either wanted them to revolve around America or rocket jumping, and, well, there isn't really a lot of either of those things in Pokemon. For his ace Pokemon, I was actually able to come up with something pretty special, but the rest of them are going to be relatively generic fighting types. Soldier's first Pokemon is going to be a Grapploct. Wrestling, from what I've heard, is absolutely huge in the United States, so this kind of works. I would not tell him that Grapploct comes from the Galar region, which is the Pokemon equivalent of the UK, because he would not like that, but Grapploct would make for a pretty good starting Pokemon in a 4-gym leader battle. Soldier's second Pokemon is going to be a Pangoro. I've chosen Pangoro here because the Pokédex says that whilst it constantly picks fights with everything and is difficult to get along with, it does have a good heart deep down, and I think if you squint, that's representative of Soldier. Pangoro's dark typing reflects this double nature, and I think that's also quite fitting for Soldier as well. Well-meaning sometimes, but also incredibly violent and ill-mannered. Soldier's third Pokemon is going to be a Lucario, which is most definitely the most generic choice in this entire video. As we all know, Lucario has the ability to sense the aura of the living beings around it, and I think Soldier can do this except purely when it comes to race. He could smell a communist a mile away. Okay, just be grateful I didn't choose Machamp, which is actually the most generic fighting type Pokemon of all time. Lucario is way cooler, even if Lucario fans are just genuinely some of the worst people on the planet. And finally, for Soldier's ace Pokemon, I have gone with Hawlucha. The specialty in this comes from Hawlucha's signature move, Flying Press. This, to my knowledge, is the closest thing in the Pokemon world to a market garden. Flying Press is the only Pokemon move in the entire game that has 2 types attached to it, being fighting and flying, which coincidentally were the same types I gave Soldier in my previous video. The only thing this move is missing to be utterly perfect for Soldier is an increased chance to crit, but then again, if it could do that, it would be one of the absolute best moves in the entire game. So here is what Soldier's team would look like. I think I've done pretty well for what I had. I'm especially proud of the Hawlucha bit, but unfortunately there are just no explosive jumping based Pokemon, because that is even more niche of a topic than bush based Pokemon. Spy, however, is a much easier man to build a Pokemon team around, and with the Ghost type already being taken up on this list, the Dark type is here to stay. Spy is a sleek, sharp dressing, efficient assassin, and his Pokemon are going to reflect this. And I am especially proud of his ace Pokemon, which is probably the most fitting ace Pokemon on the entire list. Spy's first Pokemon is going to be Liepard, a Pokemon that is actually hated by a very small subsection of competitive players. Long story short, this thing had cheese. In the modern day, however, Liepard is a very neglected and rightfully so Pokemon just because it's not very interesting. It does, however, fit the criteria I've laid out for Spy's Pokemon quite nicely. Small blessings are small blessings after all. Spy's second Pokemon is going to be an Umbreon. We all knew an Eevee would feature somewhere on this list, and I think it's just most fitting for Umbreon to be here. Umbreon is one of the evolutions I've just never really cared for, yet seems to be one of the much more popular ones, and I think with its sleek design and unique move pool, it's a pretty fitting Pokemon for this list. Now this next one is a bit more personal, as I would be completely remiss if I didn't include my King Weavile anywhere on this list. Weavile is just great. It's by no means my favourite Pokemon, but every single game I've played, and every single game I've played competitively, I have had a Weavile. The pinnacle of a glass cannon Pokemon done perfectly. And I think a Pokemon like that, in tandem with a much more tanky Pokemon like Umbreon, would be pretty difficult for a gym leader of this level. And finally, for Spy's fourth Pokemon, his ace, I have chosen Zoroark. Illusion is just a Spy disguise ability. There's no getting around it. This synergy is absolutely perfect. Now I know how Zoroark works kind of conflicts having a last Pokemon be your ace in a gym leader battle, but we're just going to bend how this ability works slightly for the sake of hypothetics. A Pokemon with some incredibly strong attacks but is rendered utterly defenseless when its disguise is broken. Sound familiar? Spy's team is overall one of my favourite teams we've put together for this list. Really strong, really well balanced, and ultimately really synergistic. And finally, we make it to the last gym leader of the video, and of course it's going to be Engineer with the Steel type, not the Electric type. I am so tired of having that comment. I will make Engineer an electric type when he gets an electric meter in-game. It really does suck how good Engineer is at absolutely everything, because these videos are starting to become relatively predictable as a result. Another tally to the board, my dear Byleth. And so, because of Engineer's technical mastery, all of his Pokemon are going to be mechanical inanimate objects, like for example his first Pokemon, which is going to be a Klinklang. Gears and Cogs are to Engineer what Gas and Passing is to Pyro, and therefore Klinklang is a very fitting Pokemon. I don't really have much else to say about it. I utterly do not care about this thing under any circumstances, but I feel Engineer will show it a lot more love than I would. Engineer's second Pokemon would be a Revavroom. Car engines are about as mechanical as you can get. I mean, what is a Sentry if not just a 16-cylinder killing machine? And I really want to say I like the idea of Engineer physically fixing his Pokemon if anything goes wrong with them. I think that's really sweet. Overall, Revavroom is a solid choice. For his third Pokemon, I'm choosing Magnezone, the original metallic mechanical object Pokemon, or at least part of the line anyway. It's always been really surprising to me just how much use Magnezone has had in the competitive scene over the years. I really like Magnemite, but I actively dislike this thing quite a lot, but you really can't deny how versatile it is. Something I feel NG would appreciate greatly. And the fourth, final, and Engineer's ace Pokemon of this entire video is Archaladon. Oh, what's that? It's not inanimate enough for you? Well, that's actually funny, because this entire video was actually disguised for me to talk about how much I love Archaladon and how much you should as well. This thing is cracked. Stats stronger than a pseudo-legendary, awesome move pool, one of the best typings in the game, if not the second best typing in the game, and a signature move so cool they had to make it a different type to the Pokemon itself just to balance it out. This weird stapler dinosaur taser bridge dragon is one of the best Pokemon ever added to the game, and I will die on that hill. It's in my top 5 favorites. I love this thing, Engineer would love this thing, and you should love this thing too. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. A longer version of this video, including the Elite Four and the champion of this region, will be found on my Patreon and YouTube memberships. My name has been Lon'qudor, it still is, and I hope your whole family has a wonderful Christmas.